This is the Hall of Very Good, the class of 2023. For you guys who do not know, the Hall of Very Good is a place where we celebrate players that don't quite clear the bar to get into the actual Hall of Fame, but we still feel like should be acknowledged, remembered, just remembering some guys in a very fun way. So we're doing that again. You know, there's no hard and fast rules here. The way that I've always done it is if the player has not been a Hall of Fame semifinalist, they are eligible for the Hall of Very Good. I remember you with a couple of guys thought that if they were on the all-decade team, they were not eligible. Joey Porter was one of those guys for you. It's just like, oh, you know what? If you're on the all-decade team, like you can't be in the Hall of Very Good. You should probably be a nominee for Canton Court, which we also are going to do this offseason, which is where we argue for a couple guys that we feel like should be in the Hall of Fame. Before we even get started today, I'm going to acknowledge a couple of mine may be on the line. A couple of mine may be a little bit too close to too good, but we can acknowledge that as we move through. I think we have 4 each this year. I'm curious if we have any of the same ones. We've never done that before, but that's what we got. We got 8 guys, and we're going to hash out why they belong in the Hall of Very Good. Why don't you kick us off?
Yeah. Should we rattle off who we named last year?
Let's do it.
Okay. I last year I had Ricky Waters, Sean Rogers, Chris McAllister, and Joe Horn.
Joe Horn.
That was a fun one to talk about with Joe Horn. That was one. He kind of gets lost in those kind of early mid 2000s. You know, JC Horn's now coming around, but those early 2000s receiver runs, especially with the celebrations, he was the other one. And he had a good career, a fun career. But yeah, Joe Horn was a fun one to talk about last year.
Last year I had Antoine Winfield, which was probably the first guy I should have thought of when we did this exercise. I love Antoine Winfield. Antoine Winfield Senior. It is funny how many of these guys now have kids in the NFL.
The first year we did it, I had Patrick Surtain, Senior, or the first.
I had Navarro Bowman last year.
Yes, that was a good one.
Was fantastic for a few seasons. Obviously, injuries really derailed his career. Dante Culpepper, same sort of idea, just unbelievably entertaining. Don't have to sell you on that one.
You're after my heart.
And then one of my favorite players of all time, even when I was young and he came into the league, I think, pretty much when I was finishing up high school football. I want to say might have been his rookie year or maybe his last year at Louisville as I go back and think about it. Yeah. So his rookie season was like right after I finished playing. It was Elvis Dumervil. Oh, and I just loved Elvis Dumervil because I was also a 5'11" pass rusher. So all the stuff that Elvis Dumervil could do, I was like, I appreciate you so much. Like this undersized guy who was consistently one of the best pass rushers in the NFL year in and year out, even though he was 5'11". And you know, this is a guy who only went to 5 Pro Bowls. He's never been a Hall of Fame semifinalist, so he just squeaked in for me, just on the line of too good, I think. So those are the types of guys that we're talking about here. What do you got for me?
Okay, I'm going to start. I got some kind of unique figures, which I think is very fun for this.
That's important. That is important. It's a huge part of the consideration process.
Have to be distinct. And I'm going to start with one of my favorite running backs of all time, Brian Westbrook. And actually,
that's amazing. I was so close to putting him on there.
I thought you were going to say
I did not have him. When I was going back through, what I've done is just to kind of cull the list a little bit, is I'll go back through total approximate value from 2000 to 2012,
like that,
and I'll skip the first 100 guys, and then I'll go into the second and third tier. And I saw Brian Westbrook's name, and I was like, "Ooh, I'm gonna file that one away," because that's potentially a really good one.
I actually thought he made more Pro Bowls. So by memory, that's what he only made 2, which makes sense if you look kind of at his stats. 1 first team All Pro, which was a remarkable season. 2000, I think it was in 2007. I'm trying to remember off the top of my brain.
I want to say it was 2004.
It might have been
they
4.
Went to the Super Bowl.
I know. Now I'm mixing up the 2 years. I should have this. I do have notes, but not the exact years. But he did have a great year where he had a 90 catch season, 2,000 yards from scrimmage. He made first team All Pro that year. But just
2007, actually.
It was, right?
His only other Pro Bowl was 2004. That's what I'm remembering.
Which was also a good year. A complete 3-down running back that is kind of one of my favorite types of players in football. Mualde Moore, I bring up all the time, is another one of these players. But if anyone that's never watched Brian Westbrook, some of you Gen Zers, just think of Austin Eckler, but maybe even a little better. But he is just so good. Just such a good pass catcher, good runner with balance, and he was a great returner. One of the few players ever in NFL history to have a season with 2 rushing touchdowns 2 receiving touchdowns, and 2 return touchdowns all in the same season.
What I love about what you're saying right now is that when I think of Brian Westbrook, he's one of the first guys. Like if someone were to ask me, this has been a mailbag question before, who was built in the wrong era? Like who came along 10 years before he should have come along to kind of settle into the best possible version of that player? And Brian Westbrook is like a perfect example.
Yes.
If Brian Westbrook played now, he would be one of the best running backs in the league every single year.
Period. Him and Peter Work. Those is a receiver.
Yeah,
but those are 2 guys that like I'm like, God, you were born 10 years later, you'd be an all-time.
Put Peter Work in the slot and let him go to work.
Oh, just go. Watch Peter Work highlights from Florida State are some of the most fun ever that you'll ever watch.
Just a little undersized.
That's it.
And when you were a little undersized at receiver in 2000, that was a huge deal.
And not on a creative offense or a forward-thinking offense at the time. It was really like you could go to 3 teams that would unlock you at the time. But anyways, back to Brian Westbrook. But if you just think of just a monster on choice routes, on angle routes, he was so good that Andy Reid saw CEH play in college and was like, that's like 60% of Brian Westbrook. I'm going to draft him in the first round because that's how much fun Brian Westbrook was. But just a fantastic 3-down running back, great pass catcher, one of the best pass catching running backs of all time, but also had great vision. 3rd round pick like that, just made a nice career for himself. I know Eagles fans love him. He was kind of a classic too when I was a kid because especially being in the NFC and competing against the Eagles and everything. Brian Westbrook was one of those classic. He's so underrated that he kind of became rated properly. It was everybody's favorite underrated guy, and then he became kind of properly rated.
Still, man. I mean,
no one brings him up anymore.
That team went to the Super Bowl in 2004. Okay, they were 8th in the NFL in scoring. He was the 2nd most important skill position player they had after T.O. Like he was their 2nd best receiver on those teams, and those offenses were pretty darn good.
Yeah.
And my other thing about Brian Westbrook is kind of this aura of the Andy Reid screen game, and why Andy Reid's screen games was the design of it is so good. The memories of that start with Brian Westbrook. Like it starts with Brian Westbrook and then eventually creeps into some of those Chiefs running backs early on because they had to live through that because they had a season where their wide receiver didn't catch a touchdown pass and they were still really good. So but Brian Westbrook is like the first kind of moments of just appreciating Andy Reid in that way.
Watch his highlights. It's hilarious. It's just, there's so much DNA that you watch now where Jerick McKinnon's catching some of these balls now, and then now it's the same plays, just now out of the shotgun or a little more spready. Same exact plays though. It's really, really fun player. And I wanted to start off with him because I actually thought his accolades would be more. And then looking at it, I'm like, no, this is perfect for this show because he had, for about a 5-6 year period, everyone that watched football at that time in the early 2000s remembers Brian Westbrook as just this unique type of player, pass catcher, and just really, really good at it, as well as being a dynamic returner and apparently a great teammate as well. I know all of his teammates liked him as well. So I think it was one of the easiest nominations I've had for the show. I can't believe it took me 3 years to get to Brian Westbrook.
He's a perfect one. Okay, so I also have a running back, and I'm afraid he's too good. But I wanted to throw him out anyway because he's been retired for 15, 16 years. Okay. I don't think he's going to sniff the Hall of Fame, and it's for a very specific reason. Is Priest Holmes too good for the Hall of Very Good?
Okay, so I had him, and then I took him off because I was like, I was going to ask you the same thing. I'm fine with him on this because the stint was so short where he was at
he has 3 years, All-Pros, right? Okay? Yes. But he only has 3 Pro Bowls.
Yes.
Like he only had those 3 years of peak production. And
it was amazing.
We've seen guys do this, right? Like Terrell Davis is in the Hall of Fame. But Terrell Davis won an MVP award. Terrell Davis won a Super Bowl, 2 Super Bowls, 2 Offensive Player of the Year awards. Like Terrell Davis's peak was even higher than Priest Holmes's peak. So I think Terrell Davis has threaded that needle so perfectly to get in. I don't think Priest Holmes ever will. So I think that's kind of why he's worth acknowledging here.
He's like the all-time fantasy football champ.
Yes.
Like that's more like what Priest Holmes is remembered for, is those amazing seasons with the Chiefs O-line. I mean, he's such a good player. I'm glad he brought him up.
So guys, that if you guys are a little bit younger and you do not remember Priest Holmes, when Nate says he was the fantasy football champion, because if you had Priest Holmes on your team, you automatically won. In 2002, Priest Holmes had 1,600 rushing yards and 21 rushing touchdowns. He also added 3 receiving touchdowns and 672 receiving yards on 72 catches to those rushing numbers. Okay.
What did he average? Like 9 yards a catch? Like what's that?
Yeah. 9. For his career, he averaged 8.7. But when he got to Kansas City, we're talking receptions here.
Yeah.
9.9, 9.6, 9.3, 9.8, 9.4.
That's ridiculous.
As a receiver, I was rewatching highlights today. He could really catch the ball.
Yeah.
And he could be a vertical receiver. There were plays in Baltimore where he was running wheel routes. He was really explosive. And which is funny because his 40 time and his testing numbers are not good. Like this guy was undrafted.
Same with Brian Westbrook. He ran a 4.58 or like a 4.59. And when you watch it, you kind of see it doesn't have that fifth gear, but it's like 1 to 4 though. Like just to get there. Sorry, but yeah, that was something that
ran a 4.7340 at the combine.
Really?
Okay. Yes, 4.7340 at the combine.
If I just guessed and just watched him, I'd say 4.48. Like
ultimate guy, just play speed. Okay.
Yeah.
And so then you look at further down the line in Kansas City, he had that year where he had 27 rushing touchdowns in 2003. During this stretch, the Chiefs offense was essentially the best offense in football. Yep. And this was when Peyton Manning was near the peak of his powers. That's how good these Chiefs offenses were with him, Tony Gonzalez, Al Saunders, Trent Green, and that offensive line full of Hall of Fame players.
Yeah.
And so he had 48 rushing touchdowns over a 2-year stretch. He had about 1,500 or 4,500 rushing yards over a 3-year stretch. And every single one of those years, 2001, 2002, 2003, he had at least 2,100 yards from scrimmage all 3 of those seasons. Okay. Which is insane. So even though he might be too good, I'm nominating Priest Holmes.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that one because it was another name I looked at as well.